Okay, so I will call the meeting to order, and there is a statement that I'm supposed to read that I do not have in front of me. Let's see if I can dig that up. There it is. The Commission on Equitable Housing and Development meeting has now commenced. It is November 10th at 3:36 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, in order to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. So there you have that, and roll call. Lori Meservo.
Present.
Michael Edmonds.
Present.
Jay Young, present. Are those the only committee members at this point? Subcommittee members? All right, we're here. I guess we have a quorum. Let's see. So number 2 on the agenda is the review and adoption of the October 28th, 2021 meeting minutes. Any comments, anything to review? If not, is there a motion to adopt the meeting minutes?
I move to adopt the October meeting minutes.
Can I second?
Well, I can second. Sure.
You want a second, Mike?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor? All right, the ayes have it. The main thing that we have on our agenda today, everyone, is to provide input on the housing affordability strategy for Tucson, particularly policy initiative number 3, policy initiative number 10. And we can also provide other feedback. Let me see if I can.
Hey, Jay, I could,
Yes.
if you don't mind, I'm happy to jump in and kind of give a quick overview of where we are and what the plan looks like and what these different policy initiatives are. So there was a link in the materials on the website to a virtual meeting if you wanted to like pretend that you had heard the whole presentation. But you know, specifically there are pretend, or Joe came to all of them. Sorry, Joe. Joe is there, but I know some folks weren't. So yeah, that's the whole kind of. Anne gave a big presentation about the data that we're using, kind of the main goal of this plan, which is to increase and support additional housing units. It kind of builds on previous planning efforts like the P-CHIP that we completed earlier this year. And there are specific things that we're, you know, that are of interest to different pieces of the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, and definitely wanted to get this subcommittee's feedback on a couple of the key policy initiatives. So I won't give the whole spiel that, you know, that we went through in those meetings, but I can kind of highlight the those couple of policy initiatives. And where this is kind of in a process is that we are agendized to present to Mayor and Council on their study session on November 23rd. And that will be just the draft plan. You know, probably the kind of their first opportunity to really see everything together and provide feedback. At which point then we would likely get feedback and come back with a final draft for them to adopt. So this is also your opportunity, I would say, as the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, and then as a subcommittee of that body. You are appointed by members of Mayor and Council, and you're a body established by Mayor and Council to advise on exactly these issues. And so I think, the developing knowledge and expertise that this subcommittee is generating will be really helpful in advising these policy initiatives as well as future policy initiatives. So with that, I'll just go very quickly through the policy initiatives that we're talking about today. Share my screen. So this is the main page for the affordable housing strategy for Tucson. Hopefully folks had a chance to review it. You can click on the draft plan and go through it at your leisure. But the two that I kind of want to focus on, and I'll mention a couple other ones just based on other conversations this group has had. But the two main ones, I'm just going to skip down to number 3, which is prioritize affordable housing in areas of opportunity, right? Which is, I think, particularly of interest to this group. We've talked to Jay's presentation, I think last month, gave a really important primer on why that's important, why we have segregated housing patterns in Tucson, and we're still figuring out what policies to adopt to really change those patterns long term. But the two actions, actually there's 3 now, the 3 actions in this policy initiative are to create a checklist and kind of a checklist that would be more of a ranking tool for when we are citing affordable housing in places, right? So there are private and nonprofit affordable housing developers. The city is figuring out how to be more involved in housing development. We are going through a process to reposition our public housing. And in all of those processes, we want to use a checklist that helps us, or again, more like a ranking tool that helps us decide where in Tucson we want to prioritize building that housing. And so you'll kind of see on the site considerations side, we would be talking about things like areas of higher wealth, areas with access to public transportation. That might even be defined more broadly as mobility, right? So access to public transportation, walkable neighborhoods, close to bus route or close to bike paths, proximity to employment opportunities, schools and community centers, access to retail amenities, and we're kind of using grocery stores as a proxy for that. Zoning, so I feel like that's cut off a little bit, but areas that are kind of identified as TOD or transit-oriented development corridors, and access to health facilities. We're figuring out kind of exactly what this would look like in terms of then also prioritizing projects that are then applying for funding and kind of giving them a score where we would score them based on their longer affordability periods, whether they're doing permanent supportive housing and that kind of thing. But that really interested in your guys' thoughts on these site considerations piece, and can answer questions if you have them. And then the second action would be explore creating a source of income protection through an ordinance. The city of Tucson has its own sort of fair housing human relations ordinance. And so I believe that would be kind of the avenue through the city adopting an ordinance like that. And we had it as a medium term, if you folks might remember in the public meetings. It's currently listed as a short term because it's actually something that Councilmember Steve Kozachik has requested be on a study session item, I believe on December 21st. And so that's something that's potentially moving forward sooner rather than later. And I think I saw that Ariel Yeah, Ariel Fry from the Ward 6 office is here too, if she has any input or feedback. The third piece here that got a little bit mixed up on this story map is to promote housing in key revitalization areas. Yay, Ariel. And that one particularly came out of some conversations with some of our LIHTC developers and wanting to be sure that we're also prioritizing the areas that have kind of undergone this these kind of more intensive planning efforts where we really do want to incentivize affordable housing, like Thrive in the 05, La Dose, sorry, the TOD planning corridor, Broadway, and the Sunshine Mile. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking and ask for any questions or feedback, or let Jay facilitate conversation on this one in particular.
I've got a few comments, and let me see. Sometimes I get a little too detailed, but I feel, and it may not need to be done, but I feel that sometimes some things need to be defined. For example, prioritize affordable housing in areas of opportunity. Are those areas of opportunity defined, listed, logged? I mean, can I tell somebody where those areas are, or are we looking to generate areas of opportunity?
So the way that we're kind of, I think, in this plan proposing defining those is through the checklist criteria.
Mm.
And so at the moment, no, they don't have kind of there's, we wouldn't point to one census tract necessarily and say that's an area of opportunity. I think the maps that Jay presented last month are helpful too. And, I think there's some overlap between the two. So yeah, curious for more discussion on that one.
And
Well,
is there, and I'm sorry, go ahead. I apologize, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Mike, I mean, it's a really great question. And, in the maps that we created that were in my presentation when we met last, we just used a methodology that the Kirwan Institute at Ohio State University had come up with to do just that, to help map out where are areas of high and low opportunity in cities. And so I think it's a really great conversation to have, what do we as Tucsonans in particular consider areas of opportunity? What makes those up? And I think the checklist that they have on here as an idea is a really good way to do that. And I think mapping is critical. I think, being able to see visually through maps, using data to show where areas of, high, medium, and low opportunity are is critical. So just wanted to add that little piece of the puzzle there.
No, I'm glad you didn't. And maybe I'm losing the word draft. This is still a draft, right? That's my preference. It's me then. What was the other one? Is there an actual income protection ordinance, or are we just looking to create one?
There is not one currently.
Okay.
The proposal is to explore one and potentially make, sooner rather than later move forward with it.
Okay.
I'm also just realizing that the story map is now a little bit outdated while we're figuring all this out. I'm going to give you guys a sneak preview at the Word document of the plan itself that has a little bit more detail. So again, those key revitalization areas, we're talking about Thrive in the 05, Sunshine Mile, Grant Road, Central Business District, La Dose, and the ETOD corridor, checklist, considerations, source of income protection ordinance. And these are some of the actions, the short-term actions that are being proposed. And so, the actions would be to develop a draft quantitative checklist that reflects the city's interrelated priorities by January of 2022. And so, would still want this body's and all of CEHD's input on that, and work with you all to refine that checklist and then finalize it. So those are the.
Okay, yeah, so that document for me works, again, for me, gives me more information I can refer back to than the than the interactive web thing, which is not bad. It's just that I like the books.
There will be a draft up by Monday.
Joe, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, quick question. I know I've brought up source of income protection in a couple different meetings. I'm curious. I've never looked at it at Tucson city level, but I know that Arizona as a state has one of, if not the lowest percentage of housing units that are housing choice voucher units. Is there any consideration that sure, Tucson can do that as a short-term priority, but also maybe trying to influence at the state level that as a state priority? I know the legislature has been a roadblock in that for forever, but is there consideration on that? And that's probably an Allison and maybe even an Ariel question too.
I'm not muted. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the policy initiatives, Joe, if you remember, is kind of advocating to our federal and state partners for change. So that's something that I'm not sure that I've heard kind of on that advocacy agenda, but we can potentially include that as well. Yeah, thanks.
I have heard it a few times in conversation, and that's definitely something that seems to be a priority within the discussion of how to increase affordable housing. So maybe we need to get that in writing more.
Thank you.
I would like to jump in here. I mean, on a couple of things. I mean, first of all, prioritizing affordable housing in areas of opportunity is a big deal, and it is actually an obligation that the city and the county have under the Fair Housing Act and receiving HUD funding. And one of the issues over really since the passage of the Fair Housing Act that I may have touched on a little in my presentation is the enforcement of affirmatively furthering fair housing, desegregating, creating areas of opportunity that are integrated. Enforcement of that provision and that part of the Fair Housing Act has really not happened over really the entirety of the Fair Housing Act. So it's really going to be up to Tucson to push this forward because frankly, HUD is really not and never has enforced this. So it is something that, the city is supposed to do, and I'm really glad to see that. There are just so many things here, I think, that are worth talking about. I mean, so in 2015, there was a really big victory in the fair housing movement in the Supreme Court. The Inclusive Communities Project sued the city of Dallas because the city of Dallas was basically citing all of their low-income housing in high minority areas, high percentage African American areas. And when the case got to the Supreme Court basically said that that's in violation of the Fair Housing Act. And so that is the impetus, I think, behind the idea of putting affordable housing in areas of high opportunity. So there's that. And, the fact that HUD doesn't really enforce this to the level that at least I believe that it should, I think that this is really going to bring NIMBYs, folks just in our community who don't want this kind of housing. I mean, forget low income housing. I mean, there are certain areas where, single family zoning is the rule, and there's very limited opportunity to build any kind of multifamily housing. And when it is proposed, it is often met with pretty stiff resistance from neighbors. So, I just feel like at the end of the day, the city needs to stand up to that because it's a small percentage of people. And if the city doesn't, it's really not gonna move this ball forward. So, preparing for that pushback, I think is really critical. So I really want to, encourage the city to be ready for that. And, again, in my work in dealing with the eviction crisis, the eviction moratorium, all of that related to COVID, I think when you start talking about source of income protection or anything at all that is pro-tenant, the Arizona Multi-Housing Association is going to show up with their guns blazing, and they're going to say, absolutely not, this is bad, it's going to raise the rent. You want to talk about affordable housing and building more affordable housing, any kind of regulation that is pro-tenant at all is going to drive up the cost of housing. I have heard them say that. So that's the power in this state. That's the power in Pima County and Tucson. So, if we think that we're going to say, oh, let's have a source of income protection. Oh, let's, do it in Pima County or Tucson, and maybe we can do it in the state. I hope we're all prepared for a stiff resistance. And, if there's not, I don't know exactly what it's going to take to get some of this stuff done, but just be prepared. That's kind of my editorial. That's what I think is going to happen, and we need to be prepared for.
Okay, can I ask for some clarification, which is going to sound kind of maybe ignorant, but can you define, so I'm sure I understand, single family housing and multifamily housing? Is this multifamily housing like apartments? Is that what we're?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally people think of single family housing as like, R1 zoning, single family homes, so just one house on one lot. I think maybe in Tucson, it's also duplexes may be considered single family as well. But I think generally, anything bigger than a duplex, fourplex, 10plex, multiplex, that's considered multifamily housing. So really anything other than just a single family, one home on one lot is really, I think, multifamily housing. That's at least my understanding.
And yeah, on that front, and just kind of framing this conversation a little bit more too, I think at the end of today's meeting, it would be awesome to have, I think you have options about kind of what you want to do in terms of advising mayor and council and the rest of the commission. You can kind of do a motion supporting these policies or suggesting changes or ways to strengthen the policies. You can ask the co-chair to write a letter that then gets submitted. And I was asking some questions today about, I think CEHD's bylaws aren't quite figured out yet in terms of what the subcommittees can do or should do, whether that a letter should go to the commission as a whole to be adopted. So right now, I think it's kind of up to you guys. You can make a motion to advise HCD, the full commission, or mayor and council on kind of your expertise. So just throwing that out there to you. Yeah, I thought I was going to add something. I thought I needed to add something else, but we're good.
Joe, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the pushback, you're right. We have to be ready for that, and there are huge influences, especially for things like source of income protection. But I think the kind of pushback we see on those also ties into my thinking that one of the things that we simultaneously need to push for, and I know it's not something that specifically we want to talk about on this agenda item, but in that list of what did we call those? The policy initiatives that ties into policy initiative number one, which was transformation of public housing. And I got to have a really good conversation for like 10 minutes with Liz Morales and Nona about that at those meetings. And it was interesting to see that and hear the desire to expand public housing. And I'm not really all the way read up on like how that works with the RAD conversion process that was talked about, but I'm learning about that. And I think that kind of ties in, because that's another way that we can do that and expand that, especially if we're looking at doing that in areas of opportunity as well.
Yeah, Joe, I think I think a lot of the other policy initiatives would potentially use, for instance, the checklist as like, prioritizing, that's where we want this to be. So, right, like keeping public housing that's already in areas of higher opportunity, to make sure that we have that mix, for instance. The one other thing that I remember that I did want to say, so we will have another, or I think it's up to you guys about whether you would like to have another subcommittee meeting in December, before Mayor and Council first meets to talk about specifically the source of income protection. Because I think it would be great to have your input on any and everything, right? Like, what does good enforcement look like? You know, what should an ordinance say? You know, what are the actions and advocacy efforts that would need to take place? So we don't have to figure that all out today either, by any means. And Ariel, please also jump in if there's anything that would be helpful.
Yeah, obviously Ariel, jump in anytime if you like. So I'm just looking at the clock here. It's 4:02. We've got one other policy initiative that we want to look at specifically, other feedback call to the audience. And then I think, you know, we also want to decide what we want to do, you know, like Allison was mentioning, you know, do we want to, you know, what we want to do with this information? Do we want to, you know, advise the commission as a whole, or mayor and council, you know, kind of what that looks like. So in the interest of time, why don't we move on to policy initiative number 10, if there's no major feedback or discussion at this point with number 3. All right, take it away, Allison.
Thanks. My mute button moved. So policy initiative number 10, you might remember, is the expanding education outreach and research efforts. And I wanted to talk about this one too, in particular, both because I added a fair housing component to this one based on the conversations that this commission has had. But the main actions here are using ARPA funds to develop a housing resource connection program that would really help people navigate finding units. We know that's been really hard. Part of the problem is just lack of units, but also helping navigate the system. Expanding housing education efforts. So working on things like destigmatizing housing choice vouchers, and making sure more people know about property tax reduction programs, the city's home repair programs. So I added this section about fair housing because it sounded like, and you tell me if we should take this out or keep it in. But you know, educating policymakers and the public about what fair housing is. I know there are, you know, sort of Southwest Fair Housing and others already do that. So one thing to think about is, does that make sense, or, you know, what else should we be doing? And then the third one, I think, was added due to feedback in the public meetings, more about continuing to do research into trends in the housing market. Right, there was concern at several of the meetings about, well, what do we know about out of town investors buying up properties here? And the answer is we don't know that much, other than anecdotally and what we've kind of been hearing. So we know that as things grow and change, we need to keep doing research. So those were the 3 kind of actions. In an action plan, we did include, you know, just throwing things in there. This is a draft and doesn't have to stay. So I want you guys to tell me if any of this makes sense. You know, this committee potentially advising on like an educational campaign about housing segregation, or, you know, overseeing, it could be anything that you guys talked about, right? Like overseeing additional data gathering efforts on updating maps, things like that. So yeah, with that, I'll leave it to you guys.
As far as housing segregation history, and Joe and Lori, maybe I missed something that you may have said in our past conversations, but it seems like Jay has got the majority of the data accessible, you know, that you've had it on the shelf, you know, available to you, Jay. Joe, Lori, is there any other places we can get more information about segregation? I mean, facts. You know, segregation history. We've been looking for maps and stuff, but I don't even know where to begin.
I mean, I guess I would say, I think you're, Mike, you're pretty right on. I mean, I think what we created at Southwest Fair Housing Council obviously is a resource and a good starting point, and maybe that's, kind of all that's needed. However, I would just say that, we made our maps 5 years ago. It's been a while. I think that the methodology could be reviewed. I think there's probably updated data that might be useful. Our maps also, partly because of technology and just, I think, lack of capacity on our end, you can't really zoom in very well to different areas. It's like, if you wanted to look out on the east side at a really, at a more granular level, you can't really do that with our maps. I know that, with some more time and GIS expertise, mapping expertise, that could be done. So while I do think that, ours is a start and maybe nothing more is needed, I would say that I think that they could be better. And then I guess I also feel like there's just a lot that we should know or could know about, like what's going on now in the market. I mean, this is just kind of an aside. I think it's funny when people are like questioning where developers and money is coming from into Tucson. I'm like, it's always been coming from California, but that's another story. So anyway, I think, like what data is important, right? I mean, again, you may not want people from outside your community coming and developing, but that's the nature of how things work. So you can't tell people from certain states not to come in and, develop in your community. So, what data is important and what is kind of extraneous that, we don't really have much control over. So, and then I think the thing that's always been interesting too is like, I think the city has done some good work over the past couple of years, getting more data and kind of doing some analysis, and are always kind of doing it. But, I don't know if it's just like the nature of kind of understanding things that you kind of have to dig for the stuff. But like, I feel like sometimes it's not all in one place where it's like summarized, but that really might not be true either. It's just, when you have reports and a bunch of data, it's just hard to sift through and hard to kind of wrap your head around. It's just, it's complicated. So I don't know if it could be made less complicated and more easily accessible. To be honest, that's maybe a pipe dream, but anyway.
Yeah, one other thing just popped in my head, and I'm just going to say this out loud. Arizona Historical Society. Now, I don't expect, because I don't think that's what they would have done in the past, that they would have any data, but I guess I could check with them to see if they've got something.
Joe?
I think that what Jay shared from the Southwest Fair Housing Council is some of the most detailed data I've seen for our area. I'd also say if we kind of want to look at it a little more in general, one of the resource articles that Jay shared, which was from The Atlantic, it was by Alexis C. Madrigal, had this map of the Bay Area and different red line neighborhoods and what they were like. But that was apparently a big project by a university, I wanted to say University of North Carolina. So compiling that data does sound like it's a ton of work, and getting it mapped well is a whole nother layer of work for it. I think Jay, and Southwest Fair Housing Council has done a really good job, and keeping that data up to date is probably the thing to do to make sure that we know where it's going as much as possible. The other thing I say is, sure, money is always come from the coast. I think one of the differences now is that it's not just money coming from the coast. It's not just Californians who want to have a second home or are looking to move somewhere less expensive, but also institutionalized investors that have commodified and financialized real estate as well. And, we're seeing more incursion of larger players in general. In being involved with the Fourth Avenue Coalition, of course, the Union on Sixth is by Greystar, which is a mega landlord. They have the district across the street too. They have like 100 complexes in Phoenix. So that kind of stuff is concerning for me too. Not just, hey, it's California money. It's that there's a lot of, unaccountable money, whether it's real estate investment trusts or whether it's big landlords or where it's coming from. You can't say, hey, you're not allowed to build that there. But, we can try to say, for the market, we don't have inclusionary zoning, sure, but as we're expanding, as we're letting the market rate developments expand, that the affordable housing expands at the rate at least that it does, and that the public housing expands too. Those are my thoughts on those things.
And then, Joe, I think you're right on there. And just to build on that, I was actually having a conversation with somebody this morning, which I think goes into this education piece. And I think, the Fourth Avenue Coalition is a really good example of a group, if I'm not mistaken, that was able to get a community benefits agreement from the developer, correct? And so, educating people about housing more broadly, like I think one of the things is that I think is interesting is people don't realize what zoning already allows, right? I mean, in a lot of places, you can already build pretty big buildings without needing to do any kind of rezoning. And I don't think people understand that. And so, having the community better understand, hey, maybe we can get community benefits agreements, or maybe we need to, as a neighborhood, look at the zoning and what's allowed. I think that also goes into housing education. But, the other piece of the puzzle here that I think is complicated and that I think is interesting about Tucson and Arizona in general is that, like, who are the housing advocates? I know, again, Joe, there's the Barrio Neighborhood Coalition, but, there's not like a nonprofit or a nonprofit group that's really kind of a pole in terms of, educating the community and being that kind of organizing force against, essentially what's already allowed in our community that seems to surprise people over and over again. And I just don't know that the city really, as much as they would like to play a role in that, I mean, I think the city can do some more education, but, just in terms of that really in a lot of ways seems to need to come from the community, which, again, who's doing that? So I think there's this chicken and the egg, cart before the horse kind of thing that's difficult to deal with, particularly as Tucson is developing. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that, Joe.
Yeah, so Fourth Avenue, the historic Fourth Avenue Coalition did do a CBA with, we started with EDR and then EDR got sold to Greystar. So we finished out with Greystar. Our intent was to do one for the Opus development at Fourth Avenue and 9th. And it was really unfortunate, I thought, that this city decided to go forth with a GPLET agreement with Opus, and thus all leverage was lost to do a CBA. That was kind of admitted as a mistake last night. But also last night, if anybody watched City Council meeting, one of the big sticking points for Scott Cummings development at 6th and Campbell was that the zoning examiner said you need to engage with a neighborhood, Rincon Heights, and start negotiations on CBA, and that hadn't been done, and that was one of the reasons that that pad did not get approved last night. As far as education, yeah, you're right. I think it's tough as hell to get a volunteer nonprofit and get people to really put in all the hours necessary for just educating their members and then the community at large. It's just a big task. And CBA wise, we've got Barrio BNC's got a task force that's really looking into doing that with CBAs. We just elected our first board and passed bylaws on Monday. So if we wanted to be a 501c3, it's just a legal organization step at this point for BNC. I don't know if that's where we're going to go or not. But yeah, it's really tough. And I love seeing some groups that have done outreach, even like the Land Trust, Picklet doing charrettes and outreach and things like that for education too. I think has been a good effort. I don't want to go on too much about that, but yeah, I think working those groups in conjunction with the city can do more. I love the idea of Section 8 outreach. To, you know, the more landlords we can get doing Section 8, the better too.
Well, and you know, and I know that something in the fair housing world that is encouraged, and I think that the city has done some of this as well, to its credit, is, you know, for Section 8 voucher holders, you know, I remember talking to the former director and you know, she said, when people first get their voucher, the only thing on their mind is getting into housing, right? Because you have a certain amount of time to be able to use your voucher. And so that's all that matters, and understandably. And then the next year or the next year, then you can start talking to folks about, hey, here are some other places where you could potentially move that are in areas of higher opportunity after they're settled and have the wherewithal to, you know, think next steps. So, you know, I think that kind of affirmative marketing and working with folks in Section 8 to, you know, use their vouchers to the best, as best they can, to put themselves in, you know, areas of high opportunity is good. And then, you know, just generally doing affirmative marketing to folks who maybe don't have access to the information about programs and other opportunities that the city has, you know, whether it's public housing or Section 8 or, you know, down payment assistance, you know, really reaching out to communities that have been marginalized over the years, and making that a priority. It's really hard work, but I think it's critical if you're talking about affirmatively furthering fair housing and making sure that everyone in our community has access to opportunity and knows about it, and you know that there are other places that maybe they would want to live depending on what their needs are. So I think that's critical as well. I see your hand up, Allison.
Yeah, I just wanted to call out a couple things. One being the other strategies that might be of interest. Right, Jay sent an article about exclusionary zoning and the problems there, and so some of the policy initiatives relate to zoning and ADUs. I know we don't have a ton of time to talk through those, but I just wanted to mention that is also what you guys have been talking about. And then as far as the maps go, I just wanted to give a quick display of, right, these are our the poverty and urban stress maps. And so we do have the ability, you know, to maybe work with kind of the older areas of, you know, opportunity index metrics and do something like this. So that could be our year of 2020 action of kind of creating this using these more online interactive data tools. So I'm just going to stop there and let you guys do your motion or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, so very good point. So we've talked about policy initiative 3 and 10. Now I guess really it's, you know, again, time check. We've got 11 minutes, I think, before we need to wrap up. So I guess I would ask for any other feedback. And if there is some, great. And if not, the next thing we need to do is figure out what we want to do with all of this. You know, how do we, what exactly is our kind of action step or action steps coming out of this committee meeting? So I'll ask for any other feedback we haven't covered. Lori?
Or you know, I don't know as much about affordable housing as I know about the homelessness system, and they're not the same, right? But I do know that there have been conversations, and this is a tough one because of course we want more vouchers, but I will say that then homeless agencies compete with vouchers because vouchers are more desirable, right? Because there's a guaranteed income there, whereas in homeless programs, eventually they're gonna time out of the program. And so I know there's been some conversations within TPCH about that kind of stuff, and I don't know what the solution is. But I guess what I do want to say is that my silence doesn't mean I don't think the conversation is good. I just have a ways to go to learn about affordable housing and development, because the homeless system just is very different, and that's my area of expertise.
Well, and Lori, I think also, I mean, you know, we haven't mentioned homelessness at all in this conversation, which I think is actually a miss in a lot of ways. So I appreciate you bringing that forward. And I think, you know, maybe we can do that some on this subcommittee, but definitely I hope the other subcommittees are, you know, making that connection to homelessness and kind of the area that you're talking about and bridging that gap with affordable housing. So I don't know how we do that, but.
Well, and I would add that folks who make it out of the homeless system become folks who need affordable housing, right? So, I mean, there's the tie, and folks will never make it out of the homeless system if we don't have affordable housing. So,
Right.
So there's that piece, and I don't know how that all works together, but I thought it was worth saying.
Well, but also, you know, the point that I really took was, you know, what are the conflicts, right? It's like the homelessness system and the affordable housing system, and are the things we're talking about in conflict with each other that are, you know, maybe harming the homelessness system or harming the affordable, you know, what's that maybe conflict that we need to address at some point. So I think that's an interesting piece of the puzzle. Joe.
I think we're looking at a couple different points on the continuum, right? But we've got what was, I guess, the Permanent Supportive Housing Subcommittee and is now the Housing First Subcommittee that is laser focused on that issue, really. So yeah, we need to make sure that the goals of our committee, where we're talking about segregation, are also in alignment with permanent supportive housing and the housing affordability. That's, I think, how the three subcommittees can kind of work together, flowing into the main CEHD committee. The other thing I wanted to say was, if we're getting into exclusionary zoning, I know Jay had given us that resource that had a ton of links in it, that's kind of the Biden plan on it, and we don't have time to do a whole conversation about it right now. But if it's appropriate, I think there's a counterpoint to anti-exclusionary zoning policy. It is most articulated, I think, by David Ambrosio from the University of Louisville, who, Jay, you probably know about. And I can provide a couple of resources if we want to read about kind of the other side of that. He's really a fan of kind of more place-based initiatives than a whole-scale anti-exclusionary zoning policy. Sorry.
Great, thanks, Joe. Just looking again at the time and the agenda, I'm going to consider that the other feedback, and then I'm going to move on to number 4, call to the audience. This is the time when any member of the public may address the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated to this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. Due to the open meeting law, Commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda item for a future meeting. So this is the call to the audience.
Jay, I would just recommend, if you guys do want to make a motion or action, to make it in agenda item number 3 on the input for HAST.
Okay. Moving back up, sorry to do things out of order here. I'm assuming that there is no other audience member that wants to speak. So moving back up to number 3, what says our subcommittee about what our action step is? I mean, I guess what's been on the table is what exactly we can do. You know, I think we can go back and suggest to the full commission that they support these policy initiatives. I guess the other thought was maybe as the subcommittee, we could theoretically make a suggestion to mayor and council, or did I understand that correctly, Allison? That's
Basically, it's not really well defined at the moment, so you are welcome to do what you feel most comfortable with. Recognizing also that the rest of the commission won't meet before the mayor and council study session.
So what do y'all think?
So the next thing is coming up is there's a study session and then we have subcommittee, or do we have CHD committee and then subcommittees?
So the timeline is Mayor and Council study session on November 23rd on the draft HAST plan. Then there will be a full commission meeting in early December. And then there's the Mayor and Council study session on the source of income protection on December 21st. And you also get to decide if you want to meet before that meeting or just not meet in December.
Well, our next scheduled meeting for segregation would be on December 23rd, I think, so we could move that up theoretically.
Yeah. I mean, here's what I'm going to suggest, and I'm certainly open to other ideas, but just to kind of get this conversation going, I would suggest that we advise mayor and council that we strongly support policy initiatives number 3 and number 10 as ways to affirmatively further fair housing and potentially take steps to reduce housing segregation. And the reason I say that we do that to mayor and council, and I guess my caveat is, and then inform the full commission that we're going to do this, and maybe, you know, like, hey, we're going to, you know, advise mayor and council in 5 days, and we just want to give the commission a chance to say, no, absolutely not. That's a horrible idea. Don't do it. And if everybody's kind of cool with it, but I don't know, you know, considering there's no full commission meeting, how that would necessarily happen. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm throwing out there.
And if you feel more comfortable advising the committee, the full commission, sorry, that's still something we can tell mayor and council that you have made that motion. So if you're more comfortable doing that, I think that's fine too. Like asking the full commission to put that forward.
But that wouldn't be able to happen before the study session, right?
It's yes, but the fact that the kind of vote took place is something we can share with mayor and council, that the segregation subcommittee has supported these policy initiatives.
I like it, Jay.
Me as well.
Okay, so I guess what I am suggesting is that, so when's the study session?
November 23rd.
23rd. So maybe something like, you know, we as the Housing Segregation Subcommittee, you know, advise the mayor and council of our support for policy initiatives number 3 and number 10. And maybe like the caveat can be that that goes to mayor and council in a week. And in the meantime, we're going to have a, you know, we're going to brief the full commission and, you know, let them know what we're planning and to let us know if that's not okay. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay. So I guess I can make a motion here. I make a motion that the Commission for Equitable Housing and Development Housing Segregation Subcommittee advise mayor and council of our strong support for the housing affordability strategy for Tucson, the HAST plan, policy initiatives number 3 and number 10, that we're strongly in support of those initiatives as potential ways to affirmatively further fair housing and potentially reduce housing segregation. And we would like for that advice or recommendation to mayor and council to go to mayor and council a week from today, pending pending our advising the full commission of our intent. It's a long motion. Anybody second?
That's why the meeting
Anybody
is
understand
recorded.
that? Okay, we have a second from Lori. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Aye, the ayes have it. All right, so we did the call to the audience. It is 4:31. Lori, I think you were the one who really needed to go at 4:30. Do you have a couple of minutes, or are you at a hard stop? You're at a hard stop. Okay.
Yeah.
So we need
Does
to.
that mean, Joe, you won't be able to say what you need to say? Because go ahead if you want to say something.
Well, I
We'll
just
still
wanted
have
to
a
bring up-
quorum without Lori, sorry.
Right,
Well,
it's
I'll wait.
it's not agendized. I wanted to thank Michael Evans for his testimony before the House Financial Services Committee a couple of weeks ago. As an advocate for public housing, I found it informative and moving, and I really appreciated it. And it's not on agenda, but I wanted to say thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Mike. Number 5, next steps, December meeting date. I guess the question is, do we want to try and meet before December 23rd? I hope that we can. And if you guys are amenable to it, maybe we can work through Allison to get a different day scheduled that's, sometime earlier in December. Okay, so we'll get an earlier meeting date there. And are there any items for future meetings that we need to discuss at this moment? So I think we can discuss that kind of between now and the next meeting as well, correct? Any items for future meetings at this point that we need to talk about? I'm not seeing anything, hearing anything.
No, I think
Joe?
you can talk about it later, but I think you probably could do a more expansive conversation on exclusionary zone.
Okay, let's put that on the items for future meetings, please. And with that, in the interest of time and a very productive conversation today, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Al. Bye.
Bye.